Your Town Matters is funded by the Government of Canada through the Local Journalism Initiative and supported by Cactus Media, Canada's independent community television association.
I'm Vicki Hogarth, and welcome to Your Town Matters. I'm joined today by the Mayor of St. Andrews, Brad Henderson, and Bill Hicks from Broken Shovel Consulting, who has been hired on for the repurposing of the courthouse in St. Andrews. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Brad, can we start by talking about what led you to Bill as a consultant for looking at the repurposing of our historic courthouse in St. Andrews?
Well, Bill was suggested to us, so when we decided that we really wanted to have a visioning exercise for the courthouse of what it is today and what it could be in the future, very quickly a number of different people in the province actually said, Bill's the guy to talk to. So I'll let him speak to his background, but he has got a lot of experience around historic, and that's the most important thing. If, as much as you'd like to get insights from everyone, if it wasn't a historic building, you probably wouldn't go to the extra process to bring an individual like Bill in. But that courthouse is deserving of the due diligence, and when you're talking about the future, it's important to a lot of people in our community, including myself. You want to make sure you do it right. And
for anyone in town who might not be aware, why is the courthouse looking for repurposing? I know it was the longest continuously used courthouse in Canadian history from 1840 to 2016. Hasn't been used as a courthouse since then. Why are you looking for a repurposing of it at this point in time?
So we were very fortunate when the municipality acquired the courthouse from the province of New Brunswick to get funds to help run it for a number of years. Well, those funds are starting to deplete now, and the reality is if we don't come up with a plan, the taxpayer of St. Andrews ultimately will be paying for the building the way it is today. It does cost a significant amount of money to maintain it. Things like even painting it would shock you at what the quotes are on a nice historic building like that. So where we're really at now is, as much as I respect the fact that it was a courthouse, is could the building serve a greater community purpose perhaps, while respecting the history of the building, or perhaps it could go in a number of different directions. You see historic buildings at times be repurposed into businesses. All options are on the table. The original plan when council discussed acquiring the courthouse was potentially to look at it as a town hall, as we've outgrown our current one downtown. So really all options are on the table, and that's what Bill is going to tell us what we should be doing. I'm going to put it all on Bill.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
That's a nice introduction, Bill.
Mm-hmm. It's all on him.
Can you tell us a little bit, before we get into
Sure.
what to do with our courthouse here in town, what's your background and what have you been involved in terms of repurposing heritage buildings?
Well, a lot, and I'll try and do it in a nutshell kind of version. I'm a landscape architect by profession. I ended up coming back to the Miramichi, actually. I'm a New Brunswicker, grew up in Evanston, and I ended up working on not just site design and waterfront and Main Street revitalization, but working with historic buildings in the former town of Chatham, rehabilitating them, finding new uses for them, and then transferring them to new owners. So that was kind of on the ground stuff. Then I ended up working with the Department of Tourism, Heritage and Culture. I was Director of Heritage Branch, and sort of at another level dealt with heritage buildings around the province, provincial designation, funding programs, those types of things. And then I subsequently went on to the New Brunswick Museum and worked there. So, sort of on the ground experience in built heritage restoration, doing it from sort of a government level, and then dealing with collections and whatnot at the museum.
You were CEO of the
I was CEO of the New Brunswick Museum, and like all sorts of people who, once they sort of retire, they still feel they have a lot to give. So I started Broken Shovel Consulting, and I've been doing these types of projects for the last couple of years.
Okay, and when you look at our courthouse here in town, where does this project take you right from the start?
Well, you know, there's no question. It is an incredibly historic building, really important in the context of the town of St. Andrews and the county. It's a county courthouse. You mentioned the dates, so it was a courthouse for a very long time through that sort of colonial period, early post-Confederation period, right up until say 2016, I believe. And it's incredibly intact. It was built, as I understand it, these buildings were built in prominent locations. You notice it's elevated at the top of sort of a rising bit of land, so there's a certain prominence to it. The design is characteristic of the approach taken to those kinds of important public buildings. And it's in incredibly good shape and intact, historically intact, and in pretty good shape. I mean, obviously maintaining these buildings is a challenge, and those are the things we'll start to talk about. You know, St. Andrews has incredible built heritage. I don't think we have to talk about that too much because we all know it. Every individual piece is important, and the courthouse is one of those pieces that deserves some attention.
And when we look at it being a National Historic Site, what historical designations of a property, I don't want to say get in the way, but are definitely something that has to be addressed when you're looking at options for what to do with it?
For sure. And different designations at different levels have different approaches. So National Historic Site designation is commemorative. There's no regulatory process around it, so there's no permitting process related to change. But it is a pretty significant designation, and you want to, however you repurpose a building, you want to ensure that you maintain that heritage character, the overall heritage character of the building. It's also a provincially designated provincial heritage place, and that does come with a regulatory process administered by the province through Tourism, Heritage and Culture. So that's where the mechanism is in place to reuse the building, to make changes, but to do it in a way that again, that overall heritage character is protected. There's a municipal level of designation that's possible through the Heritage Conservation Act. That's another thing what we might talk about going forward. So different levels of designation come with different things, and they speak to different things. It's interesting that that site, it's the courthouse obviously that we're talking about specifically, but obviously the old jail, which the connection between those two buildings is really important, and the whole site. So it's the courthouse, but it's also the courthouse and the jail, and the courthouse, the jail, and the site.
I was looking at, trying to do some research before this interview about what historic courthouses in the world have become different things. Most tend to become museums, but I guess we do have a jail in New Brunswick that's famously become an inn, and there's been the odd other courthouse that's become a restaurant or again a hotel.
Yeah, you know, the opportunities or the potential is amazing. I mean, and we're going to look at, when we go out to the public and through a public survey and a mail out and an open house, we're going to talk about sort of categories of uses. So what do people, and we want to get a consensus of the people who live in the community about what should happen to this building that's in their community. So we'll talk about civic use, so that would be maybe a council chamber, maybe offices. We'll talk about cultural use, that's where you get into the notion of museums. or a performance space, or some kind of arts function. Then we'll talk about, is there a mixture there between that sort of cultural use and the civic use? And then we'll talk about private sector use. And all of those different uses have different sort of ramifications. The financing structure to maintain the building would be different in each case, and there will be discussion about, depending on which one of those categories seem to be the consensus, how does that, what does that mean in terms of municipal contribution to operations? What does that mean in terms of ownership going forward and those types of things? So there's a lot to consider. I think people naturally sort of move directly towards that sort of cultural use, museum and or performance space, those kinds of things. And the building is really interesting because it's a courthouse. There's this incredibly big open space, which offers itself to a variety of things, plus some offices on the side that can work there. So lots of uses. We're going to talk to the public about those categories and some of those other things that come out of those. What category a reuse proposal falls into.
And then obviously in an ideal world we could do with it what we want to do and follow our hearts, but obviously cost is a factor. Brad, can you speak a little bit to what the reality is of the situation?
The reality is as a municipality, we know our residents certainly value the historic nature of the courthouse. There's no question about that. But if you look at the town of St. Andrews and some of the cultural assets we already have, I'll just take one that's comparable maybe. If you talk about museums, we already have a museum with the Ross Museum. For a municipality of 3,000 people now, because of reform, to have multiple cultural sites that they're maintaining without having a revenue source associated with it, how much of the taxpayer are they willing to really subsidize these? And it's really hard. I am sensitive to the fact that it did used to be a courthouse. There is a lot of history behind it, but there is a lot of examples of historic buildings that have been repurposed for community good or business. And I think that we have to give it a proper look and proper consideration in the three buckets that he spoke of, to make sure that we are doing what's best. Because simple things, like I mentioned, like painting it, actually it really blew my mind how much that costs. A lot more than just a normal, municipal building, which again I am sensitive to, and I'm glad you touched on it because there is a significant amount of green space there as well. You look at our municipal plan, maintaining green space is very important to it. I don't picture that as a development opportunity ever, and I don't think anyone in the community does. But in the same sense, it's a lot of green space that is, it's a nice sledding hill, but there's not really a lot that happens on that green space. The archives has done a couple events there, but generally it's just open space, right? So it could serve more to the community. And again, you do have the provincial and national kind of, considerations, but also if the town was to hand it over to a not-for-profit group or even to a private business, the town itself could put covenants in it to protect it, to make sure that the things that are very important remain in place. And then lastly, I know it's not possible, but personally I'd love to see it be a courthouse again, but that's a whole other question, because there is some needs in the community for a courthouse since the one in St. Stephen has closed.
Right. I wonder if that, you and I have both been following what's happening with the RCMP and our community specifically. I wonder if that is an option. Could that be an option that we reconsider? It's maybe far-fetched, but still. Well,
a friend and Mayor Al McEachern of St. Stephen actually put a different perspective. I was always thinking of the time it took for RCMP officers, and not to go on a side interview on this, but I always thought of the time officers spend going back and forth to St. John, especially when sometimes the people don't even show and they just drive right back. I never thought of the impact of not having a courthouse in Charlotte County when it comes to, if you're a victim of the crime, you're a lot more likely to go to the courthouse to see the person that did it. And I think there's a little bit of value in that, where people, if they do something in the community, see the impact they have on people. And a lot of time in St. John, there's a disconnect. They're just there and they're with lawyers, and no one's really present to be a victim. And I think there's some value in that.
Yeah, and couple that with the RCMP being taken off to go to St. John for the day. When we talk about needing police presence in our community, that could, maybe this show will reach some people in those decision making.
Yeah, maybe this is the start.
Maybe this is the start.
It looks like we're done, Bill.
But
Well, there we go. We got the new use. My
figured it
work is
out.
done.
What a productive interview.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess
But you know, talking about reuse, a couple of things we got to balance is, and it relates to those designations. We identify a use that community's really behind, they're excited about, citizens like it, council kind of likes it. It makes sense in terms of sustainability, because that's really important, that whatever the new use is sustainable. And then to accommodate that new use, whatever that might be, there will be changes to the building. So we want to hear from the public, you know, what level of change are they willing to see in that building? So on the exterior, you know, right now it's a wood material. It's original. It's probably been repaired over the years. I know the town's had a look at what it would cost to paint and maintain that material, and from a historic point of view, that's would be ideal. But in terms of maintaining the building, paying for the building, and operating the building, are people willing to look at more modern types of exterior materials? On the interior, it's incredibly intact, and that's sort of the beauty of it from purely a tourism point of view, bringing people in and saying this is this completely intact courtroom. It's operated for over 100 years, all those things. To accommodate a use, a more sustainable reuse, you likely will have to make some kind of changes in that building. So are people willing to accept the notion of moving certain elements in that large interior space to make it function for some other activity? So we want to hear from people, what they think about that. So we want a great new use. We want to know how much, to accommodate that new use, how much people are willing to have the building change, accepting the fact that under that provincial designation, the objective is to retain that heritage character. But it is possible to sustainably reuse that building and maintain the heritage character of it, and have it really contribute to the community in ways more than just being part of that built heritage complex that's here.
So what will the engagement process be with the community, Bill? How will you hear back from people in town to see what their ideas are?
Working with Paul and Chris at the town office, there will be a public survey, and my understanding that's going to be up pretty soon on the town website. And again, the questions have been sort of developed to get the answers to some of those questions I just talked about earlier. And then there'll be a mail out, as I understand it, and that mail out can be returned. It'll have the same kind of survey questions in it. There'll be a public open house in say mid-June or so, and that's really good timing, because we'll have a chance to see what some of the initial response is from the survey and the mail out going into that open house, and really have some good substantive conversations about how to reuse that building. This
might be a naive question, but let's say it does become a museum. What is there the taxpayer, to what degree are we affected by these kind of decisions?
So basically, I know the old municipality, so the 2,000 versus the 3,000, every $30,000 the municipality spends is an extra penny on your taxes. So, if it costs $100,000, just a random number, you can expect your taxes to probably go up, 3 cents to counter that. Ultimately, the taxpayer pays. So, I don't think that that's going to be necessarily the case. I do think that council, although they haven't debated any options because we haven't seen them, by council bringing Bill in clearly means that status quo isn't something that we want, right? So that at this point, all options are on the table, but doing nothing is not one of them, right? So either way, there will be a change, and it's about using Bill to properly find out the best opportunity for our community. I will say the town itself has done some engagement in the past, and there were some good ideas, there were some bad ideas, but there was a lot of different opinion. So really trying to get consensus, to your point, and not that you're going to get everybody, but to really get, this is something the community can support, be proud of, and feel like we are protecting history. That's where ultimately we get to. I can honestly tell you with council, there hasn't been any debate. There's no real plan other than we've got to do something about it versus it just sitting there. And we do have a party that's already approached us with a proposal where they had interest in potentially taking it over, right? So it's not like we don't have options that have been considered, but we want to make sure we look at everything before going ahead. And that's why this is, like I said, the courthouse is very, very worthy of such an exercise.
And what will be your role, Bill, after the first initial community engagement? What will you take the next step with that?
Well, we'll compile all that information, have a really good look at it, and then sort of come back to the town and say, this is what people are saying, and then see if there's a next step that we can start to talk about to take that consensus and turn it into, a real reuse, sustainable reuse option for the building, and start to look at, what does all of that mean? Who owns the building? What's the sort of financial breakdown in terms of operations costs, all those things, and where, if it is a cultural use, where do you go look for programs that can help facilitate that happening, and sort of all those kinds of things. So basically, what do people want to do with the building? How much are they willing to see it change? And then, how are we going to actually do that? And that gets down into the detail a bit. But there is a use for that building out there, and every community is different, every situation's different, but there is a use for that building, and we're gonna find it through this process and figure out a way to make it happen.
And Brad, you mentioned that you've already received a proposal. Is this something that you might be actively seeking throughout the process from community groups, from even private businesses? So
from my understanding, the stakeholders have already reached out to Bill to be part of the process. So, and it's important to note that the proposal, which was led through the archives, they just want to make sure that the same goal, that the building is respected, but also serves a community purpose. So, it's all options, like I said, are on the table, and their proposal, as far as I'm aware, is still on the table, so it'll be considered.
How do you measure, Bill, the success of your involvement in this and what you hear from the community and then put into action?
Well, success will be coming up with something that's really doable, that the community likes, council likes, and is something that, we always use this word sustainable, and it has so many different connotations and levels, but at sort of a high level, whatever, we want this use to be something that's going to work for a period of time. We're not looking for something that's going to, for the next 3 or 4 years, it's kind of an ad hoc thing, this is what we're going to do. We have to get something in that building, some function for that building that is going to work in the long run. And one of the things we're doing, and I think we'll be successful at it, we want, obviously people who like heritage buildings, our sort of heritage advocates, they'll be involved, and of course we want them involved. They'll fill out the surveys. They'll tell us what they think, and they'll be very adamant about that, and that's good. But we also want to hear from people who aren't necessarily heritage building advocates. I want to hear from everybody. And heritage is a funny thing, and I always use this thing, but everybody thinks of heritage a little differently. But everybody has a little bit of it. Even people go, oh, I don't care about that. We have to think about more realistic things than just old buildings and old collections and old things. Whatever use, ideally there's lots of access and people are in and out of the building, the public, visitors, all of those things. Certainly you want the building to still be there in the community. And if it's another kind of use that makes that happen, then that's okay too. The building's still part of the built fabric of the town of St. Andrews, and will be for a while. So.
And there is the sensitivity as well that it is in the middle of a residential area as well, so it's not in our historic business district. So there would be certain uses that might not be good to put in the center of town, but there might be some that don't disrupt the livelihoods of the neighbors too. So there's a balance. So like you said, so many different filters to consider.
For sure.
But like I said, that's why you're here.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to having you both back again soon as we follow this process. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicki. That was great. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
My guests today have been Bill Hicks, the consultant for the repurposing of the courthouse in St. Andrews, and the mayor of St. Andrews, Brad Henderson. I'm Vicki Hogarth. Thank you for watching Your Town Matters.